Hi, I'm Jason Watkins, Senior Manager of Financial Operations for Tampa International Airport. Here to talk to you today about our AME workflow rewrite. It's a project we began about a year ago when we implemented our new Oracle HCM suite and went from a shared HR setup to a full core HR setup. And that really presented us with an opportunity to dramatically cut down on the customization within our back-end AME workflow rules, those workflow rules that govern requisitions, invoices, purchase orders. We were a relatively small organization with about 430 custom rules. Some of those rules were very specific to a given supplier, a given account number, or a given user. If an account number changed or a user left the organization or changed roles, the rules would break. We found that was very cumbersome, it required a lot of support from our IT staff. Hopefully those IT staff stayed in place, and if they didn't, you had to teach someone else what all the rules did. And so we didn't think that was acceptable. And so we leveraged this core or this HR implementation to not only implement the modules within the HRMS suite, but also to streamline our workflow processes. One of the fallouts of not having standardization across the organization is that there was probably too much subjectivity, too much discretion in who was afforded what level of responsibility, both for requisition approval and invoice approval. And so when we sought out standardization, there were, quote, net winners and net losers in that. Folks that I'll say were brought down to a threshold that was in some cases significantly less than what they had in the past. And then there were others with newfound responsibility and newfound approval authority. But what it did allow us to do was to inject objectivity into the structure. And so that removed a lot of kind of special favors and some legacy agreements that had built up over time. So our business is really managed in two worlds. We have what we call our O&M operating expenses, and then because we're an airport, we're very capital intensive, and so we have a heavy project management component to what we do. We like to joke that we are an ongoing construction project that lands planes, and each of those projects had their own custom workflow. And so there may be multiple project managers, say a project director and a CFO, that would be involved in approving requisitions and invoices. And so we thought that was too convoluted, too complicated. And so once we reached a level where we had agreement as to what standardization should look like across the organization, we really landed on kind of two concepts, one for the operating side, one for the project side. And the first, on the operating side, is we said, we're going to restrict approvals to 6 different job codes. And so if you're a frontline manager, that afforded you a couple $1,000s of approval authority. If you're a senior manager, which is my position, you're afforded $15,000, and so on and so forth until we reached the CFO, who had unlimited approval authority. Again, that removed the objectivity. If invoices kicked out or invoices escalated, it was really easy for us to diagnose and explain to the frontline users why they were approving invoices that maybe they didn't see in the past, or why they were no longer seeing invoices that they used to receive. Some of the departments would say, well, I had this custom workflow that guaranteed that, for this given vendor at this given threshold, I was going to see that invoice, and maybe they didn't see that anymore. And then there were others who, weren't accustomed to seeing certain invoices, and they would see those invoices. But on balance, now we've had about a year of experience with it, and you find out ultimately folks say, hey, this works. The project costing side was probably the more significant change. And so for a given project, and I think we have about 60 ongoing capital projects running right now, each of those projects had their own requisition rules and their own invoice approval rules. And many times the invoice approval rules didn't reflect the requisition rules, which always, in my mind, begged the question, if I can approve a requisition, when that invoice comes in, why would I not be in the same position to approve the invoice for the work I approved on the front end? Didn't make a lot of sense. And so we thought those rules should work in tandem, and that's what we've done. because the structure on a project is different than on the operating side, we needed a basis for understanding who on a project should be responsible for approving invoices. And so we actually leveraged the key member table in the Oracle Project Costing module to identify certain rules or certain rules within a project that predefined who had what responsibility on the project. And with that, we would apply the standard approval rules that we built and standardized across the organization. So again, whereas in the past there were rules that would break and invoices that would get lost, because we built this standardized structure where folks could clearly understand this is my approval limit based on my job code, and I may or may not see an invoice depending on whether I'm assigned to a given project in Oracle costing, project costing. It was really easy for folks to understand why they would or would not receive or would not be involved on a requisition or on an invoice. And so, like I said, we're about a year into this experiment now, and we've found that folks are pretty accepting of standardization. They appreciate the clarity, and if they feel like they're getting the same deal that someone in a comparable position within the organization has, there's some equality and organizational harmony in that, and we found it largely to be successful so far.